Hello, everyone. Good evening, and welcome to the first session of the Let's Talk Dads series. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Tonight's session is a bite sized session looking at anger and challenging behaviours displayed by our teenagers. My name is Chloe Pope from the Safety and Resilience Consultancy, and tonight we're really lucky to have Dan Barton joining us, the CEO of Space Youth Services. Welcome, Dan. We also have my colleague Emma Stevens with us, also from the Safety and Resilience Consultancy. Emma will be monitoring the chat tonight, but also, Emma, please do feel free to jump into the discussion tonight too, if there's anything that you want to add. And finally, we have Claire Birch, who will also be monitoring the chat. Speaking of the chat, we really encourage use of the chat as a safe and supportive place. Please avoid talking directly about young people, and please don't use any identifying names or any other details, even if it is just to talk about your own children. We found in the past that the chat has been really useful for parents to share ideas, services, and websites with each other, so please feel free to do this tonight too. Tonight, we'll be talking for just 20 minutes about anger and challenging behaviour, and I'm sure you can appreciate that we could talk for much, much longer about these subjects. So if after this session you would like to hear more, you can head to our YouTube channel, which has several of our previous webinars and recordings for you to browse. We'll pop the link to our YouTube channel in the chat now and at the end of the session later tonight. We will also be recording tonight's session content, which can also be viewed at a later date on YouTube. So let's get straight into it. Anger and challenging behaviour. We're all likely to have really different ideas on what this means to us and to our family. You and your family will have different ranges of what's acceptable when it comes to behaviour. And what one family finds challenging, another family will find acceptable. So I want you to just start tonight's session by just having a little bit of a think for a moment. What does anger and challenging behaviour mean to you? What are your thresholds here when it comes to that behaviour? And how might your teenager present or behave in a way that would make you think, yep, they're angry, or define their behaviour as challenging? Just have a little bit of a think for a moment. What does that mean for you, and what does that mean for your teenager or teenagers and family? I wanted to start by acknowledging that we can all feel angry at times. Anger is a really, really important, healthy, and often useful emotion, which has kept all of our ancestors alive by helping our fight, our flight, and our freeze system. Anger that we see in our teenagers can often be displayed more frequently than we see in younger children or adults, and can also be heightened for many reasons, such as hormonal changes that are going on in their bodies. Anger, generally speaking, is a very physical emotion, especially when we're at that real peak of it. Anger causes rushes of stress hormones like adrenaline or cortisol throughout our bodies, which can play out in very, very different ways from person to person. Most people's hearts will start beating faster. Some of us will sweat, some of us will shake, get a hot rush. Think about your own physical response to anger. How does your body feel when you're angry? And are there any physical sensations that you think your teenager might experience when they're angry? Perhaps even you could have a conversation with them after tonight's session, thinking about how different emotions play out in your body and in their body. That would actually be a pretty good starting point and a great way to understand your child's bodily response to anger, and for them to understand yours as well. But not everyone expresses anger in the same way. So, firstly, there's that real kind of outward aggression and violence. So, that's behaviour that is really obvious and that we can see or that we can hear. So, think about things like shouting or swearing, slamming doors, hitting, or throwing things. Then we have inward aggression. So that's something that we need to be very aware of in teenagers. Things like withdrawal from social spaces and interactions, things like negative self-talk, denying themselves of meeting their own basic needs. So thinking about withdrawing from food, for example, or other things that might make them happy and meet their needs. Think about kind of cutting themselves off from the world or self-harming, for example, which we will go into more detail in Thursday's session this week. Then finally, we have non-violent or passive aggression. So that's things like ignoring people or refusing to speak to them, refusing to do tasks, deliberately doing things poorly or late or at the very last possible minute, and being sarcastic or sulky while not really saying anything explicitly aggressive or angry, but still really managing to get that message across. So, Dan, I wanted to come to you now. From your experience in working with young people, what often causes anger and challenging behaviours in teenagers?
Oh yeah, thanks everyone for having me. I had a little grin there because actually I think we're all guilty of this stuff, aren't we? Quite often, I think, So
Yeah.
um, I guess because of I mean, I could talk forever around just the what even is challenging behaviour because though it is so subjective. I'm really glad you spoke about personal kind of values and reflections because a lot of this stuff really it comes from like what we perceive to be
Mm,
challenging. So if we're talking about conflict, I guess I think what we need to remember when I was reflecting on this topic, really, I was thinking like most of the most successful people in the world are quite assertive,
mm,
and it's actually a really key skill for young people, teenagers, for our children to learn to say no. It's really important to be able to say no, and it's really important to understand what no means if you receive the word no as well. So I think in their transition to adulthood, young people generally are just discovering the world and they're trying to work out when is it okay to say no, when is it okay to say yes, when is it okay to push back a bit, when is it okay to to just be very compliant and passive, and it's vital for us to support them in that. What makes it complicated, of course, is that they're going through a lot of biological changes as well around hormones and stuff. I was thinking I was talking to a colleague the other day about this thing that happens with it happens with young men a bit more, but not exclusively. But the ear canal grows very quickly at certain points of development in that adolescent frame. So this whole thing of like, you're not listening to me, like literally they're not listening. It happens quite suddenly, but for them it feels, so there is a period in time, and it could last for weeks, could last for months, where they actually literally can't hear very well, really. So
wow.
that's why it'll appear like they're just not really listening properly. And also voices are changing, so communication goes down to one or two words at a time, so you generally get a yeah, yeah, because if I speak for 5 6 words at a time, my voice is going to break, crack, whatever. That's a
Mm,
bit embarrassing because embarrassment is one of the key factors in a lot of this, so I guess when I'm thinking about anger especially, really, it's quite often the last resort for
mm,
young people, for teenagers. It's often a sign of being really tired, unsure what to do. I'm getting backed into a corner. I don't have the emotional intelligence to articulate what I want to say. I've never experienced this before, and the only thing I have left is fight or flight. And because of their dependence on us for home and environments, they can't really run. They can't. The flight isn't really an option. So it's something about fighting. So there's something about it, us recognizing as adults that they are feeling overwhelmed with their emotional newness of life as they develop into their adulthood. They're getting overwhelmed with these new experiences. They're sometimes just really struggling to articulate themselves, and we actually are the adults in the room. So it's important that we don't take for granted the things that we know about how the world works, and the skills we've learned over our years of life are all new to our children, really.
mm,
I guess when I'm thinking about anger as well, and challenging behavior, this idea of it being subjective based on your own personal experiences, whatever, there is a point obviously when you need to assess the risk of that situation. So I would just say, if there's risk to people in the home or themselves or siblings, then that's not subjective, that's not challenging behavior anymore, that's unsafe behavior. And I
mm,
think that you need a different approach for that, really. So it's
mm,
finding for yourself as a family unit, certainly as a dad or as a male in a young person's life, it's identifying where do I fit into this and what am I showing this young person about what it means to be an adult, and what can I absorb, really.
Thank you, Dan. Those biological bits are so interesting. I never knew that about teenagers' ears. I think we're often thinking about hormones when it comes to teenagers, but you've mentioned so many other factors there that could cause that anger and challenging behaviour. What I really took from that is that anger is, in many ways, kind of the very last resort for teenagers. And we all know, don't we? Some teenagers will absolutely wear their heart on their sleeve, and some dads here tonight might really see that escalation in emotion before reaching that boiling point. But for other teenagers, it can really be 0 to 100 in a matter of seconds. I think what's really important to remember is that as parents, we know our young people and our teenagers better than anyone else. So we might know that actually there's particular triggers that might kind of start that escalation for our young people, but we also might see that anger that might seem really random, sorry. But it just kind of to give some, I don't know, reflection, I guess, on what we're seeing in our own young people. Do try and notice any kind of patterns in behaviour or any particular triggers in your young people. So, for example, your teenager might really start to shout or argue whenever you mention a particular subject at school, or maybe a friend, or maybe their future or goals or aspirations. They might get really heightened when they're in a rush or made to do something that they really don't want to do. And if you haven't already, really try to start to identify patterns in your young person's behaviour, and if there is anything that particularly triggers those really tricky emotions and behaviour in them. And that's because by understanding what's behind that emotion can really help us in understanding how we can help our teenagers, as understanding that root cause of anger might be something that needs to be prioritised in terms of what's dealt with first. We can often forget just how much teenagers have going on and the new life experiences that they're navigating absolutely every single day, and the real mental load that this can take as well. So, with that in mind, Dan, what advice do you have for dads here tonight in terms of supporting their teenager who's displaying challenging behaviour or feeling angry?
Well, take a breath would be my first thing. Yeah, it's really hard. I think it's really important to acknowledge it, and you're absolutely right about trying to identify any patterns and triggers and underlying causes, because I've talked about one reason for anger is this sense of kind of embarrassment, or there's too many complex things going on, and I don't know how to respond other than run away or fight. But obviously, it could also be a reaction to other quite significant underlying problems that we need to get them off. But by and large, I think it's important to talk about it. I would say it's okay if everyone's safe. It's okay to walk away actually and talk about it after the event. I don't think you need to tackle it, and especially we don't need to escalate it. So if what we're doing every day is we're actually teaching the young people in our lives, we teach them what an adult looks like, and we teach them what's acceptable. So if we escalate the anger by just shouting louder, what we're basically saying is, I can just be angrier than you, so you're losing. You're losing this battle. Try harder. So you're just going to reinforce the fact that there's a battle here to be won. If you take away the battle, there's no battle to be won. Oh well, okay. Well, it just so we need to de-escalate first and foremost, I would say. So yeah, take a breath. Just like the old thing with counting, really, taking a bit of a breath, really, and be aware that we've got patterns of behaviour that we've witnessed in our lives. Like some of us have grown up in times when it was quite common to fight and get angry, and it's still common today, unfortunately. But that doesn't have to be the future as well. So it's something about, there is a gap, and it's a skill we all need to develop, because it doesn't come naturally. We're creatures of habit, really, and we're products of our environment and our upbringings, whatever. But there is a gap between feeling like you want to do something and actually doing it. And if you can pause in that gap and just think, okay, I'm not going to respond that way, I'm going to respond in this way, that could be all it takes to change a trajectory of a conversation. And if you change that one conversation, that will then lead to a change in future conversations, which could be far more profound than you might assume. I think it's also important as well to acknowledge that it's okay. It isn't, like you said earlier on, really, Claire. It is a natural emotion, and it
Mm,
is responsive, and in some ways it's about self-control. So I would be, after the event, I would be trying to find a place where I wouldn't have eye contact. So I might go for a drive in the car, because then I'm
nice.
looking at the
Yeah.
road, they're looking that way. That's why you have pool tables in youth clubs, by the way, so you don't have to look in the eye, But I would, or maybe make some jewelry or something, or do something like baking, where you're not eye contact, because immediately the threat's gone. And then I'd be
Mm,
just saying things like, what were you hoping to achieve by, like, when that outbow, did you want me to say something differently? Is there something that I could have done that you would have liked me to, we need to show vulnerability. We need to show that we are willing to learn and adapt and change, to role model to them that it's okay to say, I need this actually. And there's other ways of asking for it than just shouting and screaming for it, or slamming doors, or being difficult, or refusing to do, that's one way of getting my attention. There's a much better way of getting my attention. And that's by having this really adult conversation, because there might be a point now where, and there's a time and a place to speak to, certainly I would say 13 and up teenagers, sorry, like 14, 15, I would certainly be at a point where you can have some adult conversation with those. But it's almost like that's a treat and a response for behaving in an adult manner. So it's just about calling them on their behaviors. And so I just think we'd get a lot more done if you could just control that a little bit. And I would also be honest about being worried. I get worried when people are getting angry, because they're out of control. And if you're not in control of yourself in that moment, you could hurt yourself, you could hurt someone else. And this is how life events happen, where
mm,
you put trajectories in place. You get a reputation with a local sports club or your mates, and before you know it, you've got a reputation of being a bit of a hothead. And then all, so I would just try and zoom out, give them a longer perspective on the impact of that behavior, and they're not really necessarily going to get what they want from you. So, and life's a lot easier when we all just get on, and so
yeah.
just zoom out, try to have really honest conversation, avoid eye contact, all those conversations, really just a bit easier if you're not staring people down. um, but we were all young once. That's the thing. Let's we've got to approach it with an honesty and a compassion. They're
Yeah.
not alone.
Absolutely. I really like what you said there about vulnerability as well, because, we're not perfect, are we? No one's trying to be a perfect parent. We want to show our young people that we're human and that we feel
Absolutely.
emotions, but absolutely modeling kind of the healthier ways that we can display those emotions.
Yeah, yeah. And the world's changed a lot. The
Mm.
social media is always on, right? So if you fall out with someone at school, you're now like, it's 24/7, an onslaught. And before you fall out with one person, you fall out with 40 people.
Yeah.
So there's a lot going on in their developmental minds, where they still haven't really developed empathy yet. They don't really understand the concept of being part of a world. Like,
Mm.
we joke, don't we? Oh, the world's revolving around you. Well, actually, developmentally for them, it kind of is.
Yeah.
Like, it's all new, it's all exciting, it's all about them and their
Yeah.
needs and their interest. That's quite
Yeah.
a natural, normal thing, as you change from being a dependent child who can't even feed themselves to being an independent adult making their way in the
Mm.
world. There is a moment where you think, oh, it's not all about me, is it? But
Yeah.
that doesn't come until you're in your well, probably early 20s
Yeah.
generally,
Yeah.
really, in real. So there's this thing where they do think it's all, their needs are far more important than yours.
Yeah.
And it's not like they're not being like selfish, or that's just a developmental thing. So we need to be understanding as well of the chemistry that's going on in brains, and it's not,
Mm.
take the behavior away. And that's a responsive thing that is fleeting. It happens and then it goes. Get underneath the skin of why that behavior came about. What is it you actually want to talk to me about? Are you worried about a friend? Are you worried about your school? Are you worried about this? Because then you'll find the conversation blooms and
Mm.
blossoms, and then the relationship grows really well.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Dan. That's so helpful. And I know that we could talk for hours about anger and challenging behavior. It really is so complex and nuanced. So we really do appreciate you joining us tonight. We're actually at the end of the session already tonight, which I can't believe. I'm going to ask Emma to share her screen now, so that a QR code hopefully will pop up. This is the first time that we've ever ran sessions specifically for dads, so we're really keen to take any learning away for future sessions. So if you are able to, once a QR code pops up, able to scan that, I think Emma or someone else will also be popping a link in the chat that you can use instead in case you're not able to scan a QR code. Just to give us some feedback. That would be really useful just for planning for future sessions. And just one final plea, we were expecting higher uptake in these sessions. So if you do have any ideas or suggestions as to how we can reach more dads for future sessions, any ideas will be really welcome in the chat. I think we're going to stay on for a couple of minutes as well. If anyone wants to put their mic on and chat to us about any ideas for how we can reach more dads. But just one final thank you. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, every one of you. We really do appreciate it. It was a very quick session looking at such a big topic. And as mentioned at the start, we do have a YouTube channel with a variety of videos discussing a big range of topics. And those topics are relevant to parents of teenagers, but we also have some bits on there for preteens as well. So please do go and have a browse, and we'll get that link posted in the chat. We'll be back again this Thursday discussing mental health and wellbeing, and we will have Jamie Keys with us, who works for Young Devon. Next Tuesday, we'll be looking at healthy relationships, and next Thursday, we'll be looking at exploitation and drugs. So if you haven't yet booked onto these sessions, we'll get a link posted in the chat now so that you can sign up. We hope that you'll be joining us then. Thank you again so much. And thank you so much to Dan for your insight into this subject. We really appreciate it. It's been so useful to hear your experiences, ideas, tips, and insight. Take care, everyone. We hope that you found tonight helpful. Goodbye.